This video lecture is a continuation for the hurricane exercise part 3, looking at tropical cyclones in relationship to damages and deaths. So far we have taken damages from nominal dollars, converted them to real dollars, which enabled us to look at a better comparison across time. From our summary statistics, we also computed histograms to look at the data distribution over time, looking both at the histograms unadjusted as well as when they're adjusted for to powers of 10 to make them a little more readable in terms of what's going on, particularly with the smaller numbers. Your responsibility was to compute the same thing for damages, looking at the adjustment to see what that shows you as well. In this video we're going to look at looking at the trends over time of both damages and deaths. So trends are something that we're probably already familiar with. In this case, we're basically going to produce a line graph from both the death data and the damages data. So that's pretty simple. So we'll take the death values from 1900 to 2019, select those values, and then insert a new line graph, 2D line graph, right? And we're going to move this into a new sheet. So I'm going to right-click on a sheet, say Move Chart, put it in a new sheet, and we'll call this the death trend. All right, so we can see more of it. And so when we're looking at the death trend, what we want to do is understand what's been happening. So we need to make a couple adjustments. So we want the x-axis to reflect the years. So I'm going to right-click on the graphic and choose data series. And I'm going to edit the horizontal axis where the labels should be to tell it which range of values to use. So I want it to use the years. So I'm going to highlight from 1900 to 2019, highlight those and hit enter. Okay, and we can see they're added along the x-axis there. I also want to change the title to make it very specific about what it is we're looking at here. So these are annual U.S. deaths from Atlantic tropical cyclones, looking at the years 1900 to 2019. Okay, and so you should be able to see that that particularly starting from 1900, there's a pretty enormous drop going down. And so if we add a trend line to the data by right-clicking on the data and choosing that, we can see it appears right there. We're going to make that a little brighter so we can see the color. So I'll make it a little more contrast. And rather than using a dashed line, I'll make it a solid line. There we go. Because we're working with a trend line, we also always want to look at the equation and the R-square values too, to give us a sense of how well that data represents what's going on. So when we look at the equation, we should notice right off the bat that the slope of the equation, the slope of the line, is negative, right? So we see the number negative right there, and we also see, by looking at the line, we can see that it's sloping downward, right? Which means it's a negative slope. And so that means that the deaths appear to be going down. We also, though, looking at the R-square value, notice that it's a really low number. So this line only explains not even a little over 1% of the variability of the data. So it's a really poor representation overall of the data. It is kind of consistent, I think, with what I see. But the problem is that if, for example, we were to take out that 1900, that 1 year of data, it's not clear that we would still see a downward trend, because if you start, say, in the late 20s and then looking at recently, 2017 in particular, we can see that the line probably would have shifted upward. So the time frame over which we look probably matters in terms of what we're seeing the trend. So this is a little ambiguous, right? And so, I mean, I can't say more than that about what's going on here. But we can see that as far as a linear trend line goes, we do have a negative slope to that, even though we have to be cautious about how much trust we put into it. So let's do the same thing for the damages. So we're looking here at the real dollars, right? That's what we've been working with. So I'm going to highlight those values as well. And I'm going to, again, insert a line graph And this one looks a little more clear, so I want to also move this chart. I'm going to right click on it, move the chart to a new sheet, and we'll call this damage trend. Okay. And just like before, we need to edit the x-axis to make sure that that is reflecting the years. So I'm going to edit the horizontal axis and highlight those years. Enter. Okay. Add a title. Annual damages. Oops. $1,900 to 2019. Okay. This one, I think we can all probably agree there's clearly an upward swing to this. We can add the trend line to it as well. And again, I want to make this a little more visible. And I'll make it a solid line. There we go. All right. So the trend line, oops, we forgot. I want to put the equation on there, so I'm going to format the trend line again. I want the equation and the r squared. There we go. Okay, oops, that's not what I wanted. There we go. So in this case, we see that there is a positive slope. Again, that just means that that number in front of the x is a positive number, literally. But it reflects to the fact that the line is rising, right, from left to right. And secondly, we see that the r-square value is still pretty low. It's not much better than what we had previously. Although I suspect that what's happening is that because we're using a straight line, a straight line is just not really representative of what's going on with the data. Because realistically, if you were trying to draw a line that kind of followed the data, it probably would sweep upward, more like an exponential curve going like that, right? And that would probably be a better description of what's going on, which is a little frightening when you think about it, because that means the damages across the more than a century now seem to be very clearly rising, and they're rising really fast, at least in the last 20-some years, in particular since the 90s, right, or 30 years. We've seen the data damage going up. So that's really interesting. What we're going to do next is we're going to look at the relationship between damages and deaths, and which is interesting to think about because they seem to be, at least nominally, they seem to be heading in the opposite direction. But the question is there a relationship between death and damage? And we'll look at that next.